whole other rabbit hole, but it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out of the program today. I appreciate it.
Yes, not a problem. Not a problem at all. Thank you for having me, Joe.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of digging into your history here. But I want to begin with 4 years ago, we were wrapping our heads around a global pandemic. How did you make it through that pandemic period, and how did it change the way that you approach life now?
Oh, wow. What a great question, by the way, because
off
I
and
do
running.
podcasts too. So I just I'm going to steal that, not going to lie, because that's a really good question.
Good.
I would say, ironically, the worst had happened to me prior to the pandemic. So I was going through a second divorce and a financial anybody who's been through divorce knows that it really you crash and burn there, but we really crashed and burned. My ex and I, we made it epic. So I was just coming out of that in 2019. I was actually feeling pretty good, and I was heading into 2020 like, this is going to be good, like I'm getting on my feet again. And then like the entire world shut down. And all I could think was from my training, from I'm a clinical psychologist. I've done a lot of trauma work and a lot of grief work. And all I can think of is I have never participated in a worldwide trauma. And this is what this is. Like I've been through Gulf Wars and some things where America is assumed into some stuff that's across the globe, but never every single human on this globe was touched by the same thing. And so I'm like, what's going to go on? Like, I was like both kind of clinically, scientifically fascinated and personally like, whoa, like this is big. This is really big, because you can't come back from something like this. You just can't. Normal. Like, you're not going to go back to where you started. You're going to have kind of this shift in your whole thinking. So that's why I love this question. For me personally, I started doing YouTube videos. I started talking about that. I started I don't know, I'm going to have to get this information out there in a different way, because not everybody is going to be able to sit across the couch from me. And I felt kind of this, part of this is my middle age, but I'm kind of in this phase where I'm like, I want to leave the place that I came to a little better than how I found it. And so, how do I do that? How do I disseminate this information, this wisdom that I've created across my career and honestly my personal life? How do I get this out there? And so that's really what changed for me, as I started to say, okay, well, if all I can do is sit in my house, then how do I get to the people? Let's start figuring that out. And I started developing material. I started creating.
Yeah. It's interesting. Before we got on here officially, we were talking about sports, and there was always a joke because the Chiefs were so bad. They were called the Kansas City Griefs for so long. They'd always miss the field goal. Okay. So people would say, if they finally win the Super Bowl again, the world's going to come to a halt. And in February 2020, after the parade, just saying, it was our fault.
Oh my gosh.
It was our
cool
fault.
thing to say, though, being from Kansas. That's crazy. Yeah, it
bad.
Sure didn't it? It sure came to a halt.
But I'll tell you this, as if St. Mahomes on his horse needs any more luster to his star. They said that if San Francisco would have won that year, they were already coming, from Seattle down. That was an epicenter. It would have spread like crazy if the parade would have happened in San Francisco.
That's a very interesting point.
So us having it here, it still ended the world. But
still ended the world. COVID still disrupted everything. I call it the great pattern disruptor.
Yeah.
That's how I think about it. I mean, thank God our medical field, as quickly as it could rally around us to get us to a place now where we're, going to get our COVID shot like we go to get our flu shot. And really part of the social distancing in the beginning was just this kind of global understanding that we would flood the hospitals and we would see way higher deaths if we just didn't stay at home until they could catch up. And, whether you believe in science or not, or how governments handled it, that's how they handled it. Right. And so because of that, I find it to be the greatest pattern disruptor, because they didn't let us do our habits. They didn't
Uh-huh.
let us go out and work. They didn't let us go out and play in
Yep.
the way that we had. And 90% of the brain is episodic memory. It's like habit memory. It's you are being Joe and I'm being Natalie every day by habit.
Yep.
Our brain can't be like on in conscious awareness at that capacity all the time, kind of
Yep.
knowing all the things it's doing. And so the pattern interruption really brought us back to, do I want to do things like that?
Yeah.
Like I wasn't
Right.
questioning it because it was my habit, but now it was this great pattern disruptor. So it's fascinating to me to see on the, as we're healing and coming on the other side of this, what are you seeing? You're seeing
Yeah.
people not want to go back to a 9 to 5 job and be away from their family. They're like, well, wait, I figured this out. I figured out how to give you all you needed productivity wise. Why can't I just work here in my
Yeah.
office at home? Why can't I
Right.
just do it like this so I can have better balance in my life?
But I think those disruptions have been good. I think about youth, there's a level of resilience that was built up. There's been positive takeaways. And I would
Totally.
imagine in your line of work, you saw a pretty seismic change in
Ooh.
people's mentality and the way that we approach things.
Hmm.
So what I'm going to do to get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis, I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day. And one of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
How do I answer that? I have a third grader. So
Okay.
how I answer that question usually is I help people when things get tough and they don't have any rules for how to fix it.
Yeah.
So they might have come from families that didn't give them good rules. Maybe there's just not good rules yet for how to
Yeah.
fix that. And they're sad, they're mad, they have big feelings and they don't know what to do with them. And they don't have people maybe around them that are helping them with that. And so I am a specific kind of doctor that you come and talk to. We kind of go through all of what's happening in your life. And I give you some ideas for how to address those things.
So what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream?
I wanted to be like a zoologist. I was
Okay.
so in love with animals when I was a young kid. Um, and I think I even in high school still wrote a paper, like a career day paper on it. And I think what shifted me is I found out that zoologists don't make a lot of money. Unfortunately, psychologists don't either. So I don't know how how I did that shift. That
Right.
shift didn't work out so well for me. But I think what I know to be true about myself is I grew up in an alcoholic family, big family, Catholic family. I'm a middle child. There's 5 of us. And so I have 2 older siblings, 2 younger siblings. And, kind of quintessential middle child, nobody was really paying attention to me. But what I learned to do was to pay attention to everything
Gotcha.
and and kind of be a pattern, like I can pick up patterns where other people aren't seeing them because I've been training this brain to do that for a long time. Now I did it in my childhood kind of as a survival mode, because if you know when the alcoholic's going to be kind of erratic, then you can get out of the way and you can get
Yeah.
other people out of the way, and then you're doing pretty well. And I've just used this kind of skill that I built across time in my adult life, and can just recognize patterns. But what I've to go back to, like, I liked animals because they were a little less volatile, a little
Yeah.
less chaotic maybe than
Uh-huh.
the humans were in my
Uh-huh.
life when I was younger. But what I wanted always to do was kind of sit back and watch. Like, that is, to me, that's always the most fascinating thing. And then to come up with ideas about what I'm seeing, what the patterns mean.
So what was the flashpoint in your life where you were like, psychology is the route that I want to go down?
So I think when I was in undergrad, I started in pre med, and I just don't like I liked like plant science and biology, but I didn't like chemistry, and I certainly didn't like physics because it mirrored way too much math. And I was like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to do those things. Like, so then I took a sociology class, I took a psychology class, and I realized like, they're still scientists. They're still doing,
Uh-huh.
experiments and trying to see what's working and not. And even more than that, they do these qualitative experiments, kind of like Jane Goodall, where they just go sit and watch things for a long time and then
Yeah.
make up ideas. And I thought, well, that's way more in alignment with what I do. And I was, a people person, I guess, is how I would describe myself in college. And so it just made sense. So I started taking those classes, but I didn't go straight to grad school. I went into working in group homes, and I don't know how I got into that job, but I was working with developmentally delayed adults on the group home side, on the residential side. So not wanting to stay with their families, but not being able to live on their own. And how did they do that? So I did that for a handful of years and just got tired of getting called in on every holiday to work. And it's not great pay. I don't know if it is now, but it wasn't then. So
Yeah.
that led me to want to go back to grad school. And I was like, yeah, I think I could do this psychology thing. I could be a doctor. I could do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I actually when I got out of school, I got into broadcasting, sports broadcasting, kind of saw the inside of it, and I was like, "I don't know if I wanna do this." So I kinda put broadcasting on the back burner. So when I got out of college, I was working at a group home there was only female. So all of these girls were marrying foreign dudes or getting pregnant, and it was really because they were in state custody care. So the only
Yeah.
way they could get out, that was their ticket. And I was like, "Oh my God, you have no idea what you're doing. Like this is not
No,
okay." So
that's a nightmare.
it was a really weird scenario in my life that scared me out of that line of work. But it's totally, it is very essential. I mean, everybody
Mm.
need especially post-COVID, mental health is finally something that's not seen as, "Oh, well, you're depressed, get over it." That was always kind of you know what I'm
It's a
saying?
character flaw. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think the stigma still allowed for pop culture to look at mental health like it was a character flaw. Like there was
yeah,
something that was wrong with you, that you just weren't being able to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, which is that kind of quintessential America individualism idea. And what we realized as mental health professionals, I don't know if the medical professionals thought this right away, but I knew as soon as this pandemic was happening that the sister pandemic that was kind of rising and going to peak just a little after that was going to be a mental health crisis. You
yeah,
can't take everything away from everybody
yeah,
and not have significant amount of grief. And people don't think of grief as a mental health issue because everybody, like gets to grieve if they've had a major loss. Well, we all had major loss. We had
yeah,
losses of jobs, losses of a way of life. Once we were all stuck in a house together, the domestic violence shot through the roof, losses of relationships, losses of a lot of things. So I knew that sister pandemic was going to be brutal. It was going to be brutal, which is why kind of that's where my head went, Joe. I was just like, I got to get some stuff out there. Like maybe
yeah,
somebody will pick this stuff up on
yeah,
YouTube. I have no idea, but I just feel like a powerful pull to that. And I wasn't the only mental health professional that started to do that. That was when you started to see kind of that stuff boom.
yeah,
And there was a few, books that came out around then too that were like How to Do the Work by Nicole LaPera. Like there was a few of us that actually were kind of front runners in this too around the pandemic, and that has people kind of thinking about mental health differently. Like just like, oh, like mental health is like physical health. Like we
yeah,
all have health. And if we're not dealing with it well, it'll take. I could have diabetes and a heart attack, or I could go to the gym and eat well and exercise on a routine basis. Like either I'm going to emotionally know how to tolerate what goes on stress wise in my life, or it's going to get the better of me. Like that's the reality of this.
yeah. And that's why this is a meta moment right here. I mean, one of the outgrowths of that time period was podcasting has exploded. There's been more of a platform for people to get in front of the microphone and to put it out there. So I think all of this has been a part of, and I always think that podcasting, modern podcasting, is a version of therapy in itself. It's a way
Can
of,
be.
in this very divided world that we live in, it's a way of finding common ground and celebrating who we are
Hmm.
and what we're doing and how we're doing it. So, and speaking of that celebration, who has been a hero for you? Who's been an inspiration for you in your professional life?
That's a great question. The person that I always go back to that pops in my head is my mom. So my mom, being a good Catholic woman, had all the kids and then realized this not being a birth control thing is stupid. So she
Yeah.
went on birth control so she didn't have to have 7 or 8 kids.
Yeah.
And she started to go back to work when my sister was in kindergarten. So her kids were 12 years apart. So she went for, the better part of 16 years without working, maybe a little bit more than that. And she had a music degree. She wanted to be a music teacher, but what she ended up doing was going back and working for the church as a liturgist, is what they call it in
Yeah.
the Catholic Church. But essentially, it's the choir director and the music director and the one that chooses all the music that's going to be in the services. So she went back and did that, and quickly learned women don't get paid as well. Women who haven't worked in 16 years certainly don't get paid as well. They get paid like what you do if you just came out of college. And she was like, I'm not down for any of this. So
Yeah.
she went back to and got her master's while
Okay.
I was in high school. And watching her go through that process and really struggling with it, she went back. It was kind of a counseling like degree, but it was within she went to a Catholic college, so it was within the Catholics kind of sphere. I'm not exactly sure what they called that, like a minister of something,
Yeah.
but she was in classes with a bunch of seminarians, a bunch of young men who were going to become priests that were misogynist woman haters, like
Really?
really were. And I remember her coming back and crying and talking it through with friends, and I would like I'd overhear these stories. And like she did her very best within that little bubble to talk to these men and say, you can't do this. Half of your congregation are women. You can't think this way. It's dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And that at a basis is not how we should be showing up, certainly not in service to other people, which is the job that you're having. And so she just always was an inspiration to me, that no matter where she was at, she was always trying to kind of do best by the
Yeah.
world, and show up to the albatross that was in front of her and figure out a way to address it. And there was this decision she made that pissed me off when I was younger. So my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, graduated from high school, and he struggled all the way through. He had IEPs, ADHD, probably a learning disability, just way ahead of us being on top of stuff like that.
Yeah.
He really struggled. Like getting through high school was hard for him. And my mom had this opportunity to go to Greece with a bunch of women for this 2-week trip, and she'd been planning it for 2 years essentially. And then they put out the dates for the graduation, and she was going to be gone for his graduation. And she chose to go on the trip. And it pissed me off, pissed all the family off. It was kind of the, nail on the head for her marriage with my dad. And they divorced not very long after that. But I was going on a walk maybe about 10 years ago, and I was listening to this podcast, and somebody was talking about midlife transition for women and making these kinds of choices where you're choosing yourself, because in choosing yourself, you're bettering the version of you that goes out in the world and does everything. And it like a light bulb went off in my head. Like, that must have been the hardest decision she ever
Oh
made,
yeah.
because it was the most unpopular decision she ever made within our family system. But it was absolutely important, because it was, right in the midst of like her making these decisions to choose the job she wanted and put herself through, grad school
Yeah.
and all of those things. And I'm like, okay, I've got to like give her credit. I wish she's not alive any longer. I wish she had been
Yeah.
alive when I finally had that aha moment, because I definitely would have gone back and said, the version of me today has a different view on this altogether. And how brave of you to have done that when you knew that nobody was going to understand why you made that choice.
And as much as we think we've evolved as humans, there still is that notion of her having 5 kids, sacrificing everything, being at home, having to do everything all the time, and all she wants to do is go on a trip that she's planned for 2 years. I mean, it's not like
Hmm.
she was like, "Well, let's see if we can disrupt the entire lineage of my family on purpose to go to Greece." Like,
No.
that's not, you know what I'm saying? So, and sometimes we aren't ready to accept that until we get wiser ourselves. We have to be on this planet
Yes,
long enough to figure all of that out.
we do. We do need a little wisdom underneath us. And I think so. COVID, I talked about being a pattern disruptor for all of us. Midlife is usually a pattern disruptor for humans.
Yeah.
It's our second adolescence. So we have a big pattern disrupt in our adolescence, but in our second adolescence and midlife, we start to really reckon with, do I want to be doing this?
Mhm.
Is this all that there is? And so I think she was just in the meat of that. She was probably just turning 50, No, she turned 50 when I graduated high school. So 52, she,
Yeah.
but had started to plan that trip when she was about 50. So I
Yeah.
think she was making these choices based on like, I'm not doing the programming and conditioning of this is the life you're supposed to have. I'm going to start choosing for myself. And I definitely see that for most people that are
Yeah.
going through that midlife transition. It shows up differently for all of us,
Yeah.
obviously, but that's how it showed up for her.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating, who would it be? Who would you love to meet and talk to?
Oh, man. Gosh, such a good question. I wish I had had a little minute to think about
Uh-oh. Well,
this.
we can circle back around to this. Let's go into the
Yeah,
next
let me think
question here.
about it because
Yeah.
I love that question.
Yeah, it's fun. It's definitely fun. So, what is the motivator for you every day to get up? Because you're not just doing a job, you're helping people. You're actively getting people to a better place in their lives. And you have to evolve as a human being. What is that motivation for you to do that every day?
My motivation is me now. And what it used to be was what I thought was expected of me. And that I was headed into burnout. And as I have said to you, like that all kind of came to a head at my second divorce. And so now I orient towards what is it that I want to leave? What is it that I want to do in this world or leave in this world? And so I get up in the morning because I'm choosing those things and putting them in front of me. I changed my career considerably. Still a psychologist, still have a little bit of a private practice, but I also teach because I really feel powerful about creating a new generation of therapists that know what the hell they're doing
Yeah.
and aren't just, buying a degree. And there's a lot of for profit universities where they couldn't care less. They just want you to pay your tuition or
Yeah.
get your loan so that they get their payment. So I do that. I do, a coaching business. I do a podcast. I do, videos for people. Like I just want to be sure that whatever wisdom that was imparted on me gets disseminated in a way um, that it's tangible and people can use it and make it work within their life if the context of what I'm talking about applies to them. So that's what gets me up every day.
Yeah.
The only place I tripped with that was around that programming and conditioning of what are you going to do for your kids, like are you just leaving behind kind of a thing. And raising a son who's 20 and raising a daughter who's now 9, I struggled with him in that because the programming and conditioning was uh, just had me a little bit stronger, I think, back then.
Yeah.
But raising a daughter and knowing that she's going to go through this world in a very similar way that I've gone through this world, gender wise, gender norm wise, I'm like, well, I'll be damned if I let her see me do the thing and just struggle through the slog of life and
Yeah.
then only have that as a choice. I want her to see what I saw in my mom, which is an unpopular choice that, sent her in a direction that I could see brought her joy. And when she was having joy, then we were all experiencing her in a much different way and got much more from her. So I'll be damned if I like put my head down and just do the right thing because that's what I was told to do. I'm
Yeah.
going to do what I know is right for me and orient back to me. So that's
Yeah.
my guide.
So you obviously have to help people and give advice and give good wisdom to people. What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Hmm. I think the best advice I've ever gotten, ironically, came from my dad, who, being the alcoholic, was probably the stronger voice of toe the line kind of stuff. He definitely, in his life and in his choices, was telling me that. But there was this conversation we had once, um, where he was explaining why he got fired from a job or asked to leave from a job at one point, and he's like, "Well, Natalie, I told them their sacred cow wasn't so sacred and they got really upset with me. And I was like, what's that mean? I was like a teenager. I'm like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
And he's like, sometimes you just have to do what everybody else is telling you not to do, but what feels right for you.
Yeah.
You just have to say the thing or do the thing. And he's like, and it could be that you don't get feedback in the way that you want to hear it, but then you'll just have to look for what's the next right step in your life to go from there. Like
Yeah.
it's not always comfortable, but it's just sometimes you have to you have to do those things. And so that was probably the only time I heard what I would say is his voice,
Yeah.
and not just the voice of like, I should do this because this is what I've always been taught to do. So,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. So beyond your personal life with your children, what in your professional life, what are you the proudest of that you've done?
What am I the proudest of? I'm proud that um I'm proud that I left my second marriage because it would have been easier to stay.
Yeah.
And uh, I just knew from the beginning of my inklings of this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right, that if I did that, that I would be self betraying at some level. It wasn't like we hated each other, still co-parenting, all of those things. It was that in order to stay in that marriage, I had to stay in a version of myself that I didn't like, and I was really proud of myself for walking away from that, because I walked away from a lot. I walked away from friendships and um, just a whole community of people that disagreed with why I was doing that at the
Yeah.
time. So I'm really proud of myself for doing that, because it was tough. It was tough at 43 to be bankrupt and start over again. And that's
Yeah.
literally where I was. Like everything was gone. And I was like, okay, well, hopefully I have a good another 40 years under my belt
Yeah.
of working and stuff,
Yeah.
because I won't be able to survive unless I keep working until I'm 80.
Yeah.
Unless, some miraculous thing happens and money falls in my lap. But yeah, it was a tough choice. It would have probably been easier to stay.
Yeah. Those are one of those things in life that you can never prepare for when you go through that. But when you hit
Mm-mm.
that point, it's like the expectations go out the door and everything that you add on top of that is just it's good. So
Yeah.
it's the phoenix rising. It's like I always think about the metaphor, especially here in Kansas. When I drive across Kansas, they're always burning the grasses to regenerate it to get it to come back up. And I think that human beings just have it's just whether you want it to happen or not, you have to just burn it down and you got to
Yeah.
rebuild.
Yep.
So
Yep.
um so at the end of the day, after all of this time on this planet, everyone has a perception of you, family,
Hmm.
friends, clients, colleagues, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I just think I'm human, and I'm, choosing what's in front of me every single day. I really just orient back to like, what's the next right thing for
Yeah.
me. I think other people, when you ask them, it depends on in what context they know me, but you'll hear a lot of things like she's really smart and she's super strong, and she's the person I go to for advice. There's one voice that is different to that, and that's my older sister. But my older sister is my rock, and the one that I go to when I'm not feeling strong, intelligent, or any of those things. And so she ends up, having a different journey, a different lived experience of me. But for me, I've, let I make a daily, almost a meditative practice of letting go of others' ideas of what I should be, and coming back to what's just the next right thing in front of me. What
Yeah.
do I need to be doing right here, right now,
Yeah.
with the gifts that I have right now? And that is definitely, for my mental health, changed things considerably when I let go of what the past was, when I let go of worrying about what the future was, and I really just let myself be in the present. That made everything so much easier for me. And I'm a bit of a zealot when I start teaching about, mindfulness practice, meditation practice, and why we should be doing it, not only from my neurological, clinical psychologist space, but just from the spiritual lived experience of, it's so much easier just to live the day that you have, instead of living in the day that you have, living for a bunch of days you can't change
Yeah.
and a bunch of days you don't know about yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. So before
Hmm.
we get out of the digital door here and get to the good business of your podcast, if anybody wants to hire you, one last chance, who would love to meet and talk to?
I know, it's so funny. The person that jumped in my head is no longer here,
That's fine.
and
We can
so
do a
I had to
ghost.
think. I
We
had
can
to
do
think.
it.
Oh, we could do a
Let's
ghost.
do a ghost.
Um, s- well, now I've kind of changed my mind. I'm going to
Okay,
go to who I
yeah.
changed my mind. The
Okay.
person who's alive is Amy Poehler.
Okay.
I would
Yeah.
love to sit down and have a hilarious lunch
Yeah.
with Amy Poehler. I
Yeah.
think she's brilliant.
Uh-huh.
I think she's ballsy in a way that I really enjoy and love to pick the brains of other women that have chosen to live life in that way. That's a little that has more friction
Yeah.
because I just want to know, like what drew you to do that, and
Uh-huh.
are there any things that I could glean from that? And she's hilarious, and
Yeah.
so we all could use a laugh all
Oh,
the
yeah.
time.
Uh-huh.
So I think
It's
Amy
okay.
Poehler would be the one. Mhm.
Perfect answer. So, if anyone wants to listen to your podcast, hire you, any of the good business, where do they go?
They go to my website, which is learntoloveyourstory.com. Easy to find, and they can find everything else from there. But if they want to look where they get their local podcasts, the name of my podcast is Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving.
Excellent, Dr. Natalie. Thank you
Mhm.
so much. I appreciate your
Yeah,
time. This has been wonderful. Best of luck with
thank
everything.
you.
And hopefully, Minnesota has a parade sometime here very soon.
Hopefully,
Fingers
fingers
crossed.
crossed.
Yes, indeed. Great.